Everyone. Elliot here from ESBR Boxing, joined by my esteemed colleague Lawrence to discuss the reaction, I suppose, or review for another stain on the consciousness of boxing, which has been the Taylor Catterall decision and result that's just taken place at the Hydro in Glasgow. Lawrence, I want to come to you, obviously, with some talking points over the next 10 to 15 minutes, but I want to just gauge as a sort of check-in how you're immediately feeling following witnessing that.
It's just really upsetting because I just feel like just the feel of the fight was so pro Catterall. It wasn't those where when you actually dig into the rounds, he won them all. It was one of those where it just constantly felt like Catterall was commanding that fight. It just had the feel like I wasn't scoring it religiously. I wasn't noting everything down, but it just felt so much to me like Catterall was just calmly winning the fight, just constantly landing with his jab. Taylor, I feel like, just didn't really land much. He was rushing in. He kept just tying himself up when he moved forward. Didn't really do much on the outside. He was constantly getting out jabbed. So it's just a shocking decision. It's a shocking decision, and I have totted up the card. And Ian John Lewis gave 8 rounds to Josh Taylor. I don't see how 8 rounds of that fight go to Josh Taylor at all. I can't wait to see the specific ones he gave to Taylor, and then watch them individually and say, do you give this to him? Because well, anyway, I won't go into specific rounds because I'll see which ones Ian John Lewis did, but it's just awful decision, and it's depressing, really. It's just depressing.
I think, I was scoring it fairly religiously up until the end of the 8th, when I think I had it 6-2. It's Catterall with a knockdown. So at that point, I was going, well, Taylor's going to need a knockout here, or a knockdown himself for it to take it on the scorecard. And there was a point deduction. I was thinking, okay, that's not ideal, so I'll go switch back on a bit. But then obviously Taylor got the point deducted as well, and you're still thinking, well, there's no logical explanation or reasoning that can give this fight to Josh Taylor. And then when obviously Catterall was announced first in the scorecard, I was a bit concerned at that point, thinking, okay. And then when it went obviously 1-1 with Taylor, you're sort of thinking, right, is it going to be and the new? But then obviously, the undeserving and still was announced. Yeah, I think it's just a shock for us, shock for everyone. I think if we just look to try and unpick, you mentioned obviously there about Catterall's jab being very effective and following up, and I think he measured the distance obviously very well. His head didn't seem like Taylor could really get going at any point. But I think there's a lot of, I suppose, feedback or conjecture following the fight that Taylor was weight drained, possibly, and his performance was affected by that. Is that something you buy into? Do you think that had any bearing on it, or do you think he was just outclassed this evening?
No, I think it definitely had a bearing on it for 2 main reasons. One, he looked awful at the weigh-in, and 2, he fought much worse in this fight than he did, in those Ramirez fight, any of his other fights. This is the worst performance of his career, pretty much, in a long time. And I feel personally, I wrote the preview of this fight where I gave Taylor pretty glittering praise, and then I watched that performance and thought, where's it all gone? All the things I said that he was good at, he didn't do. He wasn't evasive. He didn't use medium range well. Every time he came in, I was like, okay, finally he's going to be able to do some inside work. Every single time he just rushed in and got tied up. And I was like, come on, Josh, come on, because he does have the ability. He does have the ability. We've seen it. The knockdown against Ramirez in the 6th round was a thing of beauty, an utter thing of beauty. And he's such a talented boxer. So I can only assume it was the weight. But that's no disrespect to Jack Catterall. Obviously, he's had an absolutely amazing performance. He took it to Taylor, but in a really smart way throughout the 12 rounds ever. He had the perfect game plan. He did do the one thing I said in my preview that Jack Catterall needed to do to win was avoid medium range, and he did that perfectly. That tying up Taylor, that's not just Taylor rushing in as well, that's Catterall being really smart. He never let Taylor hit him with anything particularly damaging. He just almost completely made it a battle of jabs that he outclassed Taylor on, despite Taylor's height and reach advantage. That's another thing. That's what I thought, because Catterall's such a good jabbing fighter, but then I kind of almost dismissed that in the build-up because Taylor had the height and reach. But then he just was out-jabbed. So I do think it's the weight. I just think it has to be. Because why else was Josh Taylor so poor? He was clunky, his footwork wasn't there, his head movement wasn't there, he was just advancing straight on, there's none of this with the head. He just was not. It was just a poor performance. He looked really ordinary. That's the thing. Josh Taylor is an extraordinary fighter, but he looked really ordinary in there tonight.
I totally agree. I think I agree with what you're saying. And I think picking up what you was mentioning there, obviously, as well about Catterall's game plan and his tactics. I think he had he put the mockers on Taylor essentially all night with his controlling the distance. And you see that Taylor couldn't really get off. I mean, early on, I mean, he was landing. I mean, he was attempting to land that jab, sort of gliding and levitating in. And Catterall was very good at offsetting that and moving away, and then also, like you say, tying him up. And I think there's also something to be said, isn't there, about Taylor? I mean, we were saying it off beforehand about how drained he looked. Essentially, even when he turned up to the arena, and even in the fight, so you still see his cheekbones fairly pronounceably, which is kind of a warning sign. But again, I still expected him to get the job done. He's still gone 12 rounds, but then yeah, it seemed that tactically he was out of depth. So yeah, I mean, I'm still stunned, to be perfectly honest. But I think to pick up, I suppose, maybe that weight thread as well, and going into where do you think, I suppose, Taylor was going to go from this? I mean, what other fights are out there? Did you expect him to go back into maybe a Catterall rematch? I mean, there's going to be a lot of clamour for it, or do you think he's essentially just going to leap up to the next weight class, fight people like Crawford, make that top rank connection?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's the only place he's going to go is 147 pounds, because I don't think he ever makes 140 again. The only thing I'd really respect if he did, I understand if he says he can't make the weight, because to be fair, it looks like he can't. But I'd like to say, I'll give Catterall a rematch at 147, or just say I would do it at 140, but I really can't make the weight because that's what it looks like. But I know that he deserves that rematch. I think we need to see some humility from Josh Taylor here, because this will hang over him if he tries to style it out. People aren't going to forget that. People are angry, and it's not going to go away. And you still get that with even fighters like Callum Smith. People just bring up that John Ryder fight and bring it up. And that's going to be like that for Josh Taylor now. In a way, it's a shame, because if we take the result at face value and say it's a win, he's still one of the top pound-for-pound fighters in the world. This is what everyone's going to go on about. So ideally, I'd like to see the rematch with Catterall at 147, because I just don't think Josh Taylor will ever make 140. And in a way, maybe I don't even want him to try it, because he looked really rough. So as if Catterall wants to go to 147, maybe he doesn't. If not that, I'd like to just see a few fights at 147. I don't want him to jump straight in with Crawford now. Before this fight, I thought, yeah, let's get it straight on with Crawford, because it looked like it all lined up with Top Rank, even though Crawford's technically not with Top Rank anymore. But now I think we need to see, as I said, that humility, not just in reaction, but in next opponents. I think we need to see a little bit of a rebuild from Josh Taylor. He almost needs to treat it like a loss. So that's probably what I'd like to see. For Jack Catterall, I just hope that if Taylor goes up and these belts fragment, he can grab one of them. I think he probably will be able to, because he will have some sympathy. Even among, you see sometimes with the sanctioning bodies, after a bad decision, they can be a little bit gracious and sometimes give people, opportunities that they might not have otherwise got. That's what I hope for Catterall. And yeah, Taylor, humility, that's the key word. I'll say it again, humility. That's what I want to see.
I think that's actually some astute points raised there as well. I think you're very right with the Callum Smith and the John Ryder comparison. I think even to a degree, I don't think anyone is obviously going to sit here and deride or denigrate the achievements of Canelo Alvarez, but even that Triple G first fight is always mentioned even now. You're sitting there going
118, 110. Everyone says it, 118, 110.
Yeah, exactly, every single time. So it's like you can't move beyond that. And I think this will follow Josh Taylor and haunt him for the rest of his career, even if, I mean, the only way over it, in my opinion, is to have the rematch, and to win convincingly, because otherwise it's simply going to follow him around. And I think, like you were saying about Jack Catterall, it would be a reward in itself if if he achieves and claims one of those belts, if they do fragment. But equally, I suppose there's that sense, isn't there, of just like, will he be the same mentally coming back from disappointment like this? Also, he's been robbed essentially of a crowning moment to essentially himself become, undisputed lightweight champion of the world. So yeah, I'm just thinking essentially what he's going through mentally at the moment. But I think of where we need to pick up really on, I suppose, and finish on, I suppose, the wider point really, and that is, where does boxing go from here? Because you've mentioned some of those dodgy scorecards, etc., and it just seems like there's some sort of systemic structural problem in boxing. That's just, I mean, Johnny Nelson was on Sky tonight talking about obviously putting off the casual fan. Jamie Moore came on, obviously he's very close. Catterall trains him, so he was obviously devastated, but again made the valid point that someone's in the audience. And there was that sense of anyone going into boxing, you see this happening at the highest level. There is no fairness, there is no equality seemingly. The illusion of, if you work hard, you'll be rewarded, isn't fulfilled essentially. It's essentially a case of, who do you know, eat shit, swallow shit, and try and come again. And I just think, I honestly don't know. We say it so frequently. When you see a terrible card, you think that's it for boxing. Like almost like Formula One last year, they had a terrible, obviously, into the championship. And you think fans are turned off, and immediately they're making structural changes and improvements, seemingly within the industry to prevent that happening again. But boxing, it just doesn't seem to happen. I know there's a long history with corruption in boxing, but I don't know, I almost feel like we're moving to such a stage now, and there's such a forum for it, and there's obviously people who can communicate, social media, online. You can rewind fights, rewatch fights, see the history of judges and how they've scored certain fights, and it's just I think there's fewer places to hide. But equally, I don't know what you think about it essentially. But where does boxing go from here? How can it be improved? Where does it go? Has it knocked your confidence in boxing or your perception of boxing, or do you just see it as something which is kind of, I suppose, quite fun but fundamentally flawed?
Well, it really is. It makes you dejected, isn't it? Because as I said to you off air just then, it's not even the most surprising thing, is it? Because it does happen all those times we've listed already in this fight. And there's a million more we could have listed. We only mentioned a couple, and it's just sad. I hate that it's somewhat assumed in boxing, like, oh, home fighter, they're gonna get a bit of the rub of the green there. And we've created these narratives that justify it. I've mentioned a few of them off air, but people say like, oh, you've got to take the belts off the champion. Why? You just have to win the fight. You should just have to win the fight. It is an equally valid argument to say, oh, the champion should defend strong and he shouldn't get an easy defense. Or people say like, oh, if it's in someone's backyard, you've got to leave the judges no doubt. It doesn't matter where the fight is. You've just got to win it. And I think we need to. The thing is, the one thing I think is all these promoters, you've seen Ben Shalom's already come out and said it was bad. Everyone involved in boxing is a boxing fan. Pretty much, or even if they're not, once they've been working there a while, from what I understand, they become boxing fans. So they will know that decision's bad, and they want the best for the sport. And I think we just need to stand up and just say it just can't happen anymore. And changes. I mean, the thing is, the specifics of changes? I don't know what you do. Because people always say about kind of sanctioning judges or bringing them to explain their scorecards, but then how would you actually get it changed? Would you overturn results of fights, like make them no contests? The specifics are hard. But I think boxing now needs to come around and think about what they have to be, because it has to be something. Off the top of my head, one thing I don't like is probably the relationship between judges and promoters, and when a promoter is putting on a show, they're holding up the judges and all the kind of staff around, and they give them nice meals, and it's not that explicit corruption or anything, but that's that kind of tacit collusion where I imagine they think, okay, there's this home fighter here, because just another one that springs to mind is Campbell Hatton, Sonny Martinez. I think they clearly came into that fight. I think that it wasn't a judge fight; it was just the ref. But he's coming to that fight thinking, right, Campbell Hatton's going to get the job here. He's the big star. He's everything. And there's clearly just that culture where it's like, right, we give this to the home fighter.
Do you reckon there's like, because I suppose we're skating, I suppose possibly on thin ice here, but do you think there's an implied, as we see it, I suppose, to a degree with boxing media, in the sense that if you toe certain lines and don't necessarily challenge certain things, you can maybe have more access or maybe speak to certain people? Do you think, I suppose what you're describing to a degree, to me at least anyway, seems like from a judge's perspective, if you're kind of employed by similar promoters or whoever commissioned, boxing commissions, whatever, you're flying around the world, essentially quite a cushy thing. Do you want to rock the boat necessarily if there's a big home fighter like Josh Taylor? Do you just kind of essentially give it a close 113, 112 scorecard, give Catterall a pat on the back essentially and send him on his way? I don't know, like whether that's, like you say, whether it's kind of a subtle kind of, not like you say, not overt corruption, not like, a steel briefcase under a bridge full of $100 bills, but it's more a kind of security that you don't necessarily want to lose in the profession, I suppose. I don't know, or just culturally acceptable, or just something that you become inured to the longer you stay in it. I don't know, but I think it's a valid point personally, and I think changes would probably have to be. I mean, we say all the time, don't we, have more judges ringside or have a panel of, say, 10 judges? Because how often you hear the thing of, oh, maybe the judges have seen something differently. I think, have they really? Have they really seen something differently than what we've seen tonight? I mean, Josh Taylor was knocked down. He lost X amount of rounds, more than Catterall did, and you still don't give him the decision. So, yeah, I think so. I suppose what I'd like to finish on actually is when we're talking about where does Taylor go next, and just to capture something that's been kind of bubbling online due to his attendance in the arena is a possible Kell Brook fight. Which do you have any interest in Kell Brook fighting Josh Taylor next?
I mean, in a way, I have more interest since watching this fight with Catterall, because Taylor looked like it'd be a much more competitive fight with Brook, but just no, basically. I honestly, to be brutally honest, I wouldn't watch it. Genuinely, that's not grandstanding. I wouldn't watch it. I didn't even particularly care that much about Khan Brook. Or maybe it's because I'm a little bit younger. I don't quite have that emotional connection. I haven't, in 2010, I wasn't watching boxing. I was 10 years old or whatever. Well, I was 10 years old. I wasn't watching boxing. I didn't care that much about Khan Brook. If either of them fight again, I'm honestly not very interested. And, honestly, a Josh Taylor at 147 that doesn't need to cut, I think he just utterly just munch on Kell Brook. And does anyone want to see that? Does anyone want to watch that? And does anyone think Brook has a chance? But I did. As soon as I saw that Kell Brook was in attendance, I did worry, because it almost wrote itself then. Taylor coming up to 147. Brooks just had a big fight. They're both boxer, both make a lot of money. Makes perfect sense. And my alarm bell started to ring. But the other side of bad things of boxing is matchups like that. Money, and there's so many problems with boxing. Talk about judging reforms. I'm interested in, you said about more judges. I'm interested in scoring reforms personally. I hate the variety of 10-9 rounds in boxing. You can just nick around in the last 20 seconds, it's a 10-9, or you can batter someone from pillar for post and you don't get a knockdown and it's another 10-9. We've got to look at that. That's not 2 rounds that should have the same score. Matchups, we need to look at that. Like I said, Brook Taylor, geez, I can't even speak anymore. I'm so outraged. But Brook Taylor, that's the kind of thing that could happen, but would just be a shocking fight. Undercards, I feel like undercards have got worse since COVID. Maybe I've imagined that. They were never good. But like I said, where does boxing go? That's a conversation that everyone in boxing needs to be having right now, because it's bad. And that's only the tip of icebergs of problems I just listed, and they are big problems. And they are things that are you said about casual fans. It's really, really, really an issue. And now with the rise of MMA, I know so many people who care so much more about MMA than boxing for reasons like that. I really do. Honestly, like young people much prefer MMA to boxing. I 100% say that with my heart, and I know it's true. I know it is true.
I think the thing is, what's I suppose surprising, I suppose for other people we're watching, is the fact that we are obviously leading the boot somewhat into boxing. But the sad thing is we're doing it as people who are fans of boxing and love boxing, want to see it improve. We're not people that just looking at it for the first time thing and going, oh, this is disappointing. It's like we're so emotionally invested in it. Really, when these things happen, it does hurt us. And I think, like you were saying, the discussion around reforms is a discussion that we can elaborate on and should elaborate on over the next week, maybe the next week or so. But yeah, just a final thought for me. And I'll ask for a final thought from you really as well about what happened tonight. I think hopefully this disappointment will obviously leave me, but I think again it's places that sort of kernel of like mistrust in your mind. So I hope to kind of retain that and just think and use that really as motivation, really, to kind of continue to expose these things. I think is what you see, which was quite ugly at the end of the fight, was, I know obviously Taylor thinks he's won it. Obviously they've gone straight to Taylor, but the amount of pundits that come out kind of arguing for why he might have won it. Taylor himself saying he thought he edged it, and you're sort of like, this whole kind of, this injustice has occurred, but it's almost like in certain aspects of the media, it's already kind of, the conversation's changed. The conversation's already like, oh no, Taylor won it. And you're sort of like thinking, hold on, like similar with Callum Smith. The whole media thing sort of came around him, and then there's kind of, for a lot of people, that was just the end of the argument. He's thinking, well, no, like the ticker tape's gone off, but there's a great injustice that's happened here. So hopefully we can just, enough people start saying, enough, frankly, is enough of this. Reform needs to happen, and hopefully it will. But until that stage, I don't know, we'll probably just be probably staggering along, and good people will be lost along the way. Fighters' dreams will be dashed along the way. Then the sport will remain marginalised, I think, in that respect. So if there's anything you want to add, a final thought before we shut off?
Yeah, I thought of something then as a final thought, very similar to you, but just just focusing it down on this fight. I've talked about boxing as a whole. I think just massive support to Jack Catterall, basically. Boxing fans, just talk about him like he's world champion. Just keep mentioning name. Talk about him like he's world champion. Mention him on social media. Get his name out there. Promoters will see that. They'll give him big fights. Just make sure he gets the opportunities. Just talk about him and talk about him and back him because he really deserves it. And for this fight, for this specific fight, that's the best thing we can do, because the results in the book is not going to get overturned. We can talk about reforms, but right now, just back Jack Catterall to the end of the earth, because he just deserves it. He really deserves it. And that's my final thought.
Lawrence, thank you very much for your time. Thank you guys for watching, and what has obviously been a dark evening for boxing, but a fine evening for Dorrance and I to meet and discuss it. Keep watching our content, check out the videos, and we'll see you guys soon. Thank you very much, Lawrence. Thank you for your time.
Cheers.